Now we are going to talk about the Marine Data Spatial Infrastructure, or the MSDI. So the idea of the MSDI is basically to provide the marine spatial data to a bigger audience, basically. So there are people in this world that are governing this MSDI project. So they must have a standard. So the standard means that you've got your data policies and principles, the data quality, how the access is going to be, how the sharing is going to be, if you want to charge your for your data license, or there are any restrictions of the data. And then you need to actually talk about the data applications and metadata, like what is the legislation, is there any intellectual property rights in there, the liability, privacy, and then you need to have the infrastructure to make the MSDI, because you need to have people with, people with capacity. They need the human resource, they need the infrastructure as well, they need the, they need space, they need disk space and stuff like that, the technical stuff. And then you need the governance as well to give direction, to oversee how the ownership is going to be, and to monitor the implementation and the sustainability itself. So why do you create an MSDI? So the first one is basically to have an effective management of the coastal zone and the marine resources as well. Because when we're working with multiple data set, we have talked about data set earlier today, but basically there's a complication when your data set is coming from different departments and discipline. They're created for different purposes, they're in different formats, they have different quality specification, and you've got different ways to access it and different reuse policies, stuff like that. So the idea is to make them into one single database. And of course, it's not an easy task. It requires a huge database. And actually, in the last segment of this of today's lecture, I'm going to give you several types of MSDI that's already accessible for us to use. So a very easy example for this is basically a coast. How do you actually define a coast? Okay, because each organization defines a coast differently. For example, if you're talking with someone who is on the land, probably they will just draw the coast, I don't know, maybe in the middle, in the mean sea level. So basically maybe in here. Okay, but when we're talking about hydrographic data for nautical use, you want to have your data, at the level of tide that is the lowest as possible, because you don't want any harm happen to your shipping. For example, you don't want to um, overestimate your depth. For example, if we've got this datum, for example, and then you've got your seabed looks like this. If, for example, there is actually a state in which the tide is actually below your datum, for example, you can actually make a ship crashes somewhere in here. So again, the same coast could be defined differently by two governmental um, bodies. Okay, so if we've got them in the same data set, that would be very easy, okay, to identify. So the MSDI, they actually have this international forum that is called the UN-GGIM, or the United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management. They've got a Marine Geospatial Working Group, and they've actually there are several organizations that is in this committee. So there is the International Standard Organization. So they're talking about the geoinformation standard. There's the OGC, or the Open Geospatial Consortium. And then there's the IHO, of course, in there, in which there's an MSDI working group for maritime geoinformation and standards. So that's all about MSDI.